Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Film and Sound Archive's ARC Cinema for the 2012 NU Reconciliation Lecture, 50 Shades of Brown. My name is Michael Lobenstein. I'm the CEO Director of the National Film and Sound Archive, and we've been proud for a number of years now to host this lecture. Before we begin tonight's proceedings, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather tonight and pay my respect to elders past and present and to the longest continuous culture in the world, a fact that still astounds me, myself not being Australian, or not being Australian enough after 14 months here in Australia, to actually still not only acknowledge the diversity of these cultures, I must say, but actually to be baffled, to actually marvel at the cultural diversity presented to this rich nation by its Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, Vice-Chancellor Ian Young, Leah Armstrong and Tom Calmer, Reconciliation Australia, Professor Mick Dodson, and Alison Page, tonight's speaker. Welcome to the National Film and Sound Archive. Just a primer before the Vice-Chancellor is going to open the proceedings and introduce Alison. The National Film and Sound Archive tonight is a very different place to the National Film and Sound Archive that welcomed you and hosted this lecture last year. We are serious about the role our Indigenous collections play as the custodians of the Indigenous Audiovisual National Collection, and a critical role in not only safeguarding that heritage, but sharing this living knowledge, this living archive, is our Indigenous Collections team. And I'm very, very happy here, after a year, to stand here and say not only have we completed a review of our Indigenous collections and programs, but we also have a reinvigorated team, a team of 3 full-time positions, led by Peter White, who's here with us tonight, with Sophia Sambono, one of the curators. And I must tell you, I believe that the Indigenous Collections team here in NFSA, particularly powered by an enhanced Indigenous Cultural Intellectual Property Protocol, is actually leading the way and driving innovation in what audiovisual collections can mean to people and how they can be shared around. I think this team is a driver for innovation and brings an entrepreneurial spirit to this place that I see embodied in the work that Alison, for instance, has been doing, and I'm sure the work that she will be talking about. Our aims for the future, just in brief, to continue building a national collection of Indigenous production, both filling the gaps in terms of historical documents and works, as well as keeping up to date with the vibrant culture that is out there here in this country. Establishing a meaningful two-way engagement with communities built around our ICIP protocols and around digital repatriation, and continue communicating the important role of our collections as a collaborative, as a shared collection. And I'm particularly proud to be part of a shared lectern arrangement tonight. And look, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I hope you enjoy the lecture, and I welcome Professor Ian Young, Vice-Chancellor, to the lectern.
Well, thank you, Michael, and ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests. Can I firstly begin by joining with what Michael said in acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and whose cultures are amongst the oldest continuing cultures in human history. I'd like to welcome you all to the 9th annual ANU Reconciliation Lecture, a series of lectures which has been the university's showcase reconciliation event in its annual calendar. The aim of this lecture series is to provoke thought and discussion among the broader community about the relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians as the country strives for genuine, meaningful reconciliation. Previous distinguished Australians who have delivered this lecture in the past include the father of reconciliation, Patrick Dodson, Indigenous activist and comedian Mark Bin Bakkar, the Honourable Elizabeth Evatt, AC, renowned actor Jack Thompson, human rights law academic Professor Mick Dodson, and last year, Professor Tim Flannery. One of the ways in which the Australian National University demonstrates its commitment to reconciliation, in addition to this ANU Reconciliation Lecture Series, is through our Reconciliation Action Plan. As the first institution to adopt a university-wide reconciliation action plan, ANU has, in many respects, led the way in terms of prioritisation of Indigenous research and education and its dedication to ensuring Indigenous employment and community engagement. Reconciliation action plans are in fact the brainchild of Reconciliation Australia, which along with the National Film and Sound Archive have partnered with ANU to bring this event to you tonight. So thank you to all those who have helped organise this important event this evening. On behalf of ANU, I would also like to congratulate Dr. Tom Calma, co-chair of Reconciliation Australia, on being named ACT Australian of the Year for 2013. Before introducing this evening's speaker, I have another great pleasure to perform, and that is I'd like to present what's called the Vice-Chancellor's Students' Awards for Reconciliation. This competition was open to ANU students with a very important $4,000 prize, each for the best undergraduate and best postgraduate entry. The creative entries were required to reflect on an aspect of reconciliation arising from the ANU Reconciliation Action Plan. The winning entries were chosen for their demonstrated thoughtful commitment to the process of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And so, without further ado, the winning entries for 2012 are the undergraduate award winner first, and that is for Baimi Williamson for his sketch, Two Journeys, One Path. And the postgraduate award winner is Laura Rademacher for her essay, Language, History, Land, Stories of Anduwaka and English. Congratulations, Laura. In addition to these two awards, there was a highly commended award which was given to another undergraduate entry for a musical score, Looney, by Jeffrey Chia. So congratulations to all our winners. My final and most important task, of course, is to introduce our eminent speaker tonight, Alison Page. Alison is an award-winning Aboriginal designer, cultural planner and manager of the Saltwater Freshwater Arts Alliance on the New South Wales Mid-North Coast. Alison is a Wadi woman, and her work explores links between cultural identity, art and the built environment. For 8 years, Alison was a regular panellist on the ABC program The New Inventors, and in 2011 was appointed a member of the expert panel on constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, which handed its final report to the federal government in January 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Alison Page to deliver the 2012 ANU Reconciliation Lecture.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Ian. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, and when you read out that list, Ian, of eminent speakers, I feel completely humbled to be here tonight and to be invited to give this lecture. But before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we meet on tonight and to pay my respects to elders past and present. And congratulate the students on their awards as well. It's fantastic. Butter, peanut butter and Vegemite. That's how the kids on the school bus described in Coffs Harbour described me and my sisters Tina and Billie Jean. I'm not peanut butter, I'm Alison Page. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman and this is my story. I'm a descendant of the Wabunda and Wadi people of the Yuin Nation. My Aboriginal family on my dad's side hail from La Perouse in Sydney South and my mum from Southend-on-Sea in Essex in England. As young immigrants to Australia, my mother and her brother shacked up with an Aboriginal brother and sister from La Perouse, and their children became part of Aboriginal life in South Sydney. Coming from a family that embraced diversity, it shocked them to realise that not only was racism rampant in their new country, but their children would struggle for a sense of belonging, place and identity, both within their own Aboriginal communities as well as the communities at large. Tonight, I'd like to share with you, through my story, the progress we've made in this country in building the relationship between black and white, in growing the pride of Aboriginal people, in understanding more about Aboriginal culture and identity, and the possibilities for our future. It was made clear to me by the kids in the school bus that I'm a half-caste because I wasn't black enough to be Aboriginal and I was too brown to be white. For others, that term put me neatly into a category, when to me it caused confusion and alienated me from either world. Within our house, though, I felt no different to my older white sisters or my younger dark-skinned little sister Billie Jean. With the same mother, we were all raised with the same values, we had the same sense of belief in our abilities, the same lust for life, and the same positive attitude that was instilled by our outgoing mum. But the names on the bus reminded me that my sister Billie Jean and I would be treated differently by the world. When my parents split and we moved to Coffs Harbour on the New South Wales mid-north coast, those feelings of isolation only grew worse. In the 80s, Coffs Harbour wasn't exactly a diverse community. In fact, in the 90s, I don't think it was a very diverse community. I'm sure that my family, who consisted of every shade of brown, just confused people. As a third grader at school, I had to play with my kindergarten sister because no one would play with her because she was black. We soon realised that Aboriginal people in this part of the world were totally disrespected and that indifference was being passed on to the younger people we would grow up with. But luckily, I wasn't black, I was brown. So I could put up with being called a wog, but at least I wouldn't be called a bung. As long as people didn't guess I was Aboriginal, then I would be okay. It wasn't shame, it was self-preservation. And I cringe when I think of this now. It brings me to tears when I think of this now. Because when I meet people now, I can't wait for the opportunity to tell them that I'm Aboriginal, and I feel taller when I do. If only I was a bit darker so that people would instantly recognise me as Aboriginal. Now I'm jealous of my sister Billie Jean. And what a change in 30 years. Most of that change has happened within me and my own journey. But a big part of that change can be attributed to the growing appreciation of Aboriginal culture within our broader community. But the change happened within me first. Without Dad and our Koori family at La Perouse in Coffs Harbour, Billie Jean and I had little opportunity to connect with the Aboriginal community in Coffs Harbour, which I think would have made a big difference to our feelings of pride about our Aboriginal heritage. Privately, we felt pride for our culture. We knew that at the heart of our culture there was something beautiful that would bring so much meaning to our lives. We just didn't know how to find it. We just didn't know how to connect with it. Billie Jean and I would wonder how we would express our Aboriginality. When we were little, we would sit down by the river in Karamba and paint our faces with ochre and wonder what it would have been like to have been traditional Aboriginal people. With no one to teach us about our family and stories, we had to seek out our identities and piece our own cultural heritage together ourselves. We often wondered that what people said about the real Aboriginal people living in the Northern Territory might have been true. I think it would have been easier for us if we were in the Aboriginal dance troupe or in the football team, because we would have, felt much more part of the mob. I'm Aboriginal, but I wasn't born disadvantaged. My dad was, and still is at the age of 70, a really hard worker who provided well for my family. But I was 9 when my parents split and we headed up north, and that's when we became well and truly disadvantaged. A single mum raising 6 kids on her own often had to get food parcels from St Vinny's to survive. As a result, my sisters and I became really resourceful cooks, and I can still make a great dinner with a packet of lentils and a tin of tomatoes. Finished off with a packet of custard, because I always put a packet of custard in there. We had a really old house that the local newspaper once described as derelict. I would never let any of my friends from school come over because I was ashamed of my house. I would spend hours rearranging the furniture and trying to make it look pretty, which is probably what sparked my interest in interior design. But we were only disadvantaged on paper. I had a really, really fun and happy childhood. Although we were physically poor, because my mum was such a powerhouse of positivity, I think in actual fact we were wealthy. Even though she could not afford to invest in school excursions or Saturday morning classes, every day she would remind us that we could do anything we wanted in the world. All we needed was guts and determination. Subsequently, my sister Tina and I were the first in our whole families on both sides to go to university and earn a degree. My sister studied ceramics in Melbourne and I studied a Bachelor of Design at the University of Technology in Sydney. You know, it's almost cliche, but education really has broken a cycle of poverty and disadvantage in my family, and it's changed us. University for me was the time in my life where my sense of pride for my Aboriginal heritage really took flight. There I met many other young Aboriginal people of mixed heritage that never questioned their cultural identity and their place both within their own communities and the wider society. They too helped me piece together my own identity. A concrete Koori, confident in my spiritual and cultural values and expressing them in my way. And that has been ever since, using the language of design in all its many forms. In my final year of university, I heard for the first time about Aboriginal architecture. I can't tell you what that did to me to hear those two words together, Aboriginal architecture. It's like hearing sacred geometry. It was just fantastic, and a light switch went on. I met Dylan Combermary and Kevin O'Brien, who are Australia's first Indigenous architects, and together we worked with rural and urban communities in designing buildings as part of the Merrimah Design Group. Because we were working in a new medium, together with the communities we worked with, we used architecture and design as a new language for us to be able to tell our stories and communicate our cultural values to the world. This is design from an Aboriginal perspective. If you look at our traditional objects, like a boomerang or a woomera, they're objects of sophisticated function, of great beauty. They're inherently sustainable, but also contain a spiritual layer, which is usually carved or painted onto it. These principles are what informs our practice in design today. To match the intent and the talent of our ancestral designers is what we strive for. The story of our designs and how they are created is also important. How our designs and buildings come into being are just as important as the physical objects themselves. If every tree, rock and river has a story about its creation, then our design and building creation stories must be worthy of telling. So over 15 years of practice, we have many stories of communities we've collaborated with and the creative process of Aboriginal architecture and design. Through my work at Miramar, I've come to understand that contemporary Aboriginal culture is world-leading in merging traditional and contemporary definitions of identity as old stories are told in new ways. New languages such as design, architecture, jewellery, hip-hop, new media art are communicating cultural values that have been transferred from generation to generation for thousands of years. The values are the constant, but the stories and how they are told continually evolve. That's what we mean by the living definition of culture, and Aboriginal Australia embraces this more than ever. This has made me dig deeper and want to understand more about the values at the heart of Aboriginal culture, so we can find ways to express them in our designs and in the modern world. We talk about Aboriginal cultural values, but what are they really? What does it really mean to feel a connection to country? I've learnt over the years that it doesn't just refer to the land we stand on. It refers to the human connection to all living things and to our connectedness over thousands of years to the stars. The Aboriginal connection to country means to love the river as you would your own mother and not use her to what you can get out of her in your lifetime. We nurture and care for her to ensure that she's here for future generations. It's about understanding that our time on the planet is a tiny speck in the continuum of life. The Aboriginal connection to country is about respect. It guides the way we look after, travel through, understand and use the land. As traditional owners, we accept the responsibility to protect and sustain country, including sites of spiritual significance and family heritage. By acknowledging the traditional owners, we pay respect to the important role they play as the keepers of the land. We come to know our home and our connection to country through our family. And as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we define family as our extended network of relatives that make up our mob. It's not the nuclear family of just mum, dad and the kids. In many communities, kinship is a complex system that structures people's relationships and is tied to strict protocols, which ultimately is about ensuring that our children and our elderly are cared for. Our cultural values are taught through our law and through storytelling, whether through architecture, dance, music, a painting or the written word. Stories reveal the values at the heart of our culture, and these are the values and the stories that the world now needs to hear. Through my practice, I've reached a level of understanding about what it means to be Aboriginal, and my confidence and pride in my cultural identity is strong and continues to grow. Now I get offended when I hear the phrase half-caste, and I can truly understand and explain why it's offensive to Aboriginal people and is considered a racial slur. If I'm a half-caste, does that mean that I only half connect to country? Does half of me believe in the nuclear family and the other embrace the importance of the extended family? Does my left hand feel a deep spiritual connection and care for the land, and my right hand feel differently? The notion of half-caste is ridiculous simply because the idea of half-beliefs is ridiculous. It's like being half pregnant. It's impossible. You either are or you aren't. You either are Aboriginal or you aren't. You either align with your Aboriginal cultural values or you don't. This does not mean that I deny my mixed heritage, that I don't embrace and appreciate and recognise the influence that my Anglo heritage brings to me in my life. Just last week, I've just returned home from visiting my mother's relatives for the first time in England. It's safe to say that I'm not an Aboriginal woman living a purely traditional way of life, but because I look for ways to express my Aboriginality in this modern world, that I'm truly a product of both cultures. By virtue of the modern Australia we live in, I think the recognition and acknowledgement of Anglo culture is evident. I think it's the understanding and the appreciation of Aboriginal culture that needs more focus and attention to give it equal standing. It's fair to say that Aboriginal culture has learnt a lot from Anglo culture, yet white Australia has still got a lot to learn from Koori culture. And I think that people do want to learn more about Aboriginal culture and its values, more now than any other point in our nation's history. And that feeling is growing. Coffs Harbour, thankfully, is a different place today. There's a lot of brown people in Coffs Harbour now. On the mid-north coast of New South Wales, I now work with 10 Aboriginal communities who 3 years ago came together to host a festival on Australia Day to celebrate Aboriginal culture as part of the national identity. The Saltwater Freshwater Festival attracts 10,000 people, which is truly remarkable in a region that recorded some of the biggest no votes in the 1967 referendum to count Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as citizens. The Alliance decided to host the festival on Australia Day to counter the growing and concerning trend of antisocial behaviour on Australia Day that resulted in riots up and down the coast. Although Aboriginal people have issues with the 26th of January, we are united in concern not to relinquish the day to racism and misplaced nationalism. So this event has struck a chord with people who want a positive, family-friendly celebration on Australia Day and are delighted that Aboriginal culture has taken its rightful place as central to this. A nomadic event that moves year to year to the 10 communities that are part of the Alliance, the festival changes the towns that it visits. When we took the festival to Port Macquarie, the local police were worried that an Aboriginal event would attract trouble and that we had to put up fences to contain people. The day after, we had the area commander from Taree putting in a pitch to host the festival in Taree because, in his words, this town needs this. So I'm pleased to invite you all to Taree on the 26th of January 2013 to see not only this town shine, but to see a positive vision of who we are as a modern Australia. I feel really positive about the growing reconciliation movement because it's remarkable to contemplate the rate of change that's occurred since 1967. That referendum changed my father's life, who was 25 at the time, and it's changed mine too, even though I wasn't even born. It was a turning point in this nation's history. Now, 45 years later, we have another opportunity to take another leap forward. We have the chance to give positive recognition to the contribution of the world's oldest living cultures to our national identity. More than 108,000 Australians have already become supporters of constitutional recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This grassroots movement is growing steadily. At a political level, there is multi-party support for some form of constitutional recognition, but in what form and to what effect? I believe there's a very strong connection between recognition and practical, sustainable change on the ground. If we're to end the shocking disparity in life expectancy between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians, we need to take a creative approach that flips the argument from the negative to the positive. And this means changing the perceptions of young Aboriginal people growing up in Australia right now who believe being born Aboriginal has no benefit at all. Well, who can blame them for thinking this way when Indigenous disadvantage is one of the most commonly used phrases in the debate on Aboriginal issues, particularly in the media? It's no wonder many Aboriginal people grow up thinking that their identity is something to deny, that their heritage is a ball and chain and is something to overcome. This has to change if these young people are to have a positive future. I know this from my own experience. And this is why constitutional recognition is so important. It will give young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people new pride in their heritage so that they can grow up understanding that their culture is an advantage, not a disadvantage. I spent the first part of my life being ashamed of my Aboriginality, but I've grown up to be someone who now shouts pride for my heritage from the rooftops. Butter, peanut butter and Vegemite. Yep, we're all different shades, but we're Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We're the first people, we are Australian, and we're very proud. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, wonderful presentation, Alison. And I believe many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out there would truly understand what 50 Shades of Brown actually means for their families. On behalf of Reconciliation Australia, the ANU and the National Film and Sound Archives, I would like to extend that very special thanks to Alison Page on your powerful presentation. And for me personally, having worked with you during 2011 with the expert panel, it's been wonderful being associated with that movement. And the connection you have made this evening between culture and design is indeed extremely important to us today and plays an important impact in spreading awareness, understanding and respect for a reconciled Australia. Thank you to all the event partners, National Film and Sound Archives, the ANU College of Law and the National Centre of Indigenous Studies. As this is, as Professor Ian Young mentioned earlier, the ninth year of this successful collaboration. We at Reconciliation Australia are proud to see this commitment to reconciliation, and also thank the local Canberra community for your support to this event. It's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight at this lecture series that has become a premier event for the ANU Reconciliation Action Plan. Reconciliation Australia, as like Alison and many other people, have been talking about recognition, what it is and why it is important to us as a nation. And we have an amazing opportunity now for us to encourage more and more Australians to join that conversation through the UME Unity campaign about formally recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our founding document, our Constitution. This is a way for all of us to take the next giant step forward in bringing Australians together. So, on behalf of Reconciliation Australia, the ANU and the National Film and Sound Archives, thanks for coming along this evening. And we have a few gifts that we'd like to give out as well before we adjourn to some drinks.